Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. How are you going today? Hopefully you've had a good sleep and had some breakfast. Today's topic, we're going to look at squares and square roots. So let's write our title for today, Squares and Square Roots. So if I asked you what is a square, you would tell me, oh miss, it's just a four-sided shape where all the sides are exactly the same length. Correct? If we were talking about measurement, then yes, a square would be four sides of exactly the same length. But when we're talking about numbers, squares are numbers with powers of 2. So for example, 1 squared, or you can have 2 squared. Remember, we write powers with a tiny number top right corner. So 3 squared is 3 at the bottom, with a tiny 2 at the top right corner. Please do not make them the same size because that is not good. Powers are top right corner, smaller size number. Yeah? If we keep going, we can have 4 squared and 5 squared and 6 squared and 7 squared and 8 squared and 9 squared and 10 squared and 11 squared and 12 squared. And the list can go on forever because numbers go on forever, right? So if you say, what is 1 squared? Well, 1 squared, remember, is 1 times 1. So 1 times 1 is 1. 2 squared is 2 times 2, which is 4. 3 squared, 3 to the power of 2 is 9. 4 squared is 16. I'm just going to align that again. So 3 squared is 9. 4 squared is 16. 5 squared, 5 times 5, 25. 6 squared is 36. 7 squared, 7 times 7 is 49. 8 squared, 64, because 8 times 8 is 64. 9 squared is 81. 10 squared, 10 times 10 is 100. 11 times 11, 11 squared, 121. 12 squared, 144. Does anyone know what 13 squared is? 13 times 13. Do you know 13 times table? 169. So this list of numbers 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, etc., this is what we call perfect squares. So because they were obtained by squaring our numbers. So 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, etc. So these are called perfect squares. So squares is to the power of 2. Now be careful, 3 squared is not 6. 3 squared does not mean 3 times 2. 3 squared means 3 times 3. Okay? Now, what is a square root? Well, squares and square roots are opposites to each other. Just like how addition and subtraction are opposite to each other, squares and square roots are opposites to each other. So for example, if I told you, what's 4 squared? Well, 4 squared is 4 times 4, which is 16. So we would read this mathematical sentence as 4 squared equals 16. So that's how we would pronounce that mathematical sentence. So if the opposite of squaring is square rooting, then we could also say the square root of 16 equals 4. So since 4 squared is 16, so 4 times 4 is 16, 4 squared is 16, then the opposite, the square root of 16 is 4. So we pronounce this as the square root of 16 is equal to 4. Now, be careful in your square root sign. It kind of does look like your division symbol, say you're dividing 14 by 5 or something, but it's not. See how here I've got a little tail at the left side of my square root sign? That tail is very important. So this is square root sign. This is division symbol. Okay, so be careful. So this is, let me draw that nicely. This is square root symbol, and this is for when you do long or short division. So be careful, you always have your little tail on the left hand side so that you know it's a square root sign, not a division symbol. So summary, squares means powers of 2. Perfect squares are the list of numbers which we square. So 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, etc. They're perfect squares. Make sure when you write squares, there's a tiny 2 at the top right corner. It's a power, so it's a smaller size. Squares and square roots are opposite. So 4 squared is 16, then the opposite of that. So square root of 16 equals 4, where the square root symbol has a little tail at the corner. So for example, what is the square root of 81? Well, what squared gives you 81? 9 squared gives you 81, so we would say the square root of 81 equals 9, because 9 squared gives you 81.